Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Kaylee, and Associate Professor Lisa Williams and I have been working on this project that I'm presenting to you today. This project centers on the emotion awe in psychology. To start, I would like you to settle in, relax, and join me in watching this short video clip. So, how did that make you feel? You may have felt small in comparison to the vastness of the nature scene. Such is the experience of awe. Awe is a positive emotion that's characterized by two things: perceived vastness and a need to accommodate. What I mean by this is that when we're presented with information that doesn't fit with our current schemas of the world, we experience this information as vast. When this happens, we're motivated to modify or adjust our current schemas so that this incongruent information now makes sense, and this is accommodation. Awe has been documented to be associated with a whole host of outcomes, such as diminished self-concept, which you may have experienced during the video clip, and increased prosociality. I now want to turn your attention to epistemic emotions. Epistemic emotions are emotions that arise in knowledge generation contexts. Similarly to awe, we experience epistemic emotions when we are presented with cognitive incongruity, specifically in a learning context. This incongruity promotes enhanced attention, processing, and exploration of information. Traditionally, emotions that have been classed as epistemic are surprise, curiosity, and joy, as well as confusion, anxiety, frustration, and boredom. Given the brevity of this talk, from here on out, I'll be focusing on positive epistemic emotions only. We know from past research that epistemic emotions are related to key outcomes in learning contexts, and I'm going to share some of those findings with you now. Pekron and colleagues analyzed correlations between the traditional suite of epistemic emotions and the learner's perceived value of the learning task. They found that those who experienced greater curiosity or enjoyment in a learning task were more likely to perceive that learning task as more valuable. Epistemic emotions also drive the use of particular learning strategies. Common learning strategies include rehearsal, critical thinking, elaboration, and metacognitive self-regulation. And these, when used effectively, enhance the learning process and its outcomes. So Pekron and colleagues found that positive epistemic emotions are positively associated with several learning strategies. For example, surprise, curiosity, and enjoyment were positively associated with rehearsal and critical thinking. Moving on to performance, Lauderer and colleagues conducted a large meta-analysis which altogether included 186 studies. They explored the associations between the traditional epistemic emotions and a broad array of outcomes in technology-based learning. Interestingly, task or course level grades were one such outcome. With an eye on positive epistemic emotions, they found that enjoyment positively correlated with course performance. Now I'd like to bring your attention back to awe and in thinking about the way awe functions. It is an emotion that when information is presented that is incongruent with our current schemas, we're motivated to modify our schemas in order to make sense of this new or incongruent information. Doesn't that sound familiar? An epistemic emotion is one that arises in a knowledge generation context where attention, processing, and exploration of information is promoted in order to resolve incongruity. So based on the nature of awe and the context in which emotions can be classed as epistemic, it stands to reason that awe could make a good fit with the current suite of epistemic emotions. Also, given the nature of awe, this emotion might be particularly relevant in science learning. Science learning at its core is underpinned by violations of the learner's expectations, exploration, and cognitive accommodation. And these are all concepts that we know overlap with the outcomes of experiencing awe. McFetters offers an explanation of how awe functions in science learning. Put simply, McFetters suggests that the experience of awe in science learning contexts causes knowledge gaps to become more salient, and this in turn motivates the individual to accommodate the awe-inspiring stimuli via expressing an interest in science. And lo and behold, McFetters finds support for this pattern in an indirect effect analysis from an experiment that utilized an awe-inducing paradigm. To further highlight awe's similarity to other positive epistemic emotions, Collado and colleagues found that awe is related to improved cognitive performance. While cognitive performance and academic performance are different concepts, this finding leverages the idea that awe, like other positive epistemic emotions, may function in similar ways in academic settings. After reviewing all of that literature, where we find ourselves is in a place where theoretical and empirical evidence suggests that awe would fit well as an epistemic emotion. However, this has not yet been directly tested. The present study aimed to address this gap by measuring students' experiences of awe and other epistemic emotions in a naturalistic science learning environment. Given that psychology is a discipline of science and that we work within the field of psychology, we chose to use undergraduate students enrolled in an introductory psychology course within the Faculty of Science at UNSW. We also measured several learning outcomes covered by past research. These were perceived task value and learning strategies that we saw from Peckran and colleagues, as well as awareness of knowledge gaps and science interests that we saw from McFetters. And drawing on Collado and colleagues and Lauderer and colleagues' work, we also measured performance. As for the procedure, it's super simple. So we ended up with 191 participants. Participants completed the study online in a single session. The study ran from around midterm during semester 2 and 3, and course marks were collected at the end of the course for both terms from the coordinator after they were finalised. And this is what we use to operationalise our overall course performance. Okay, so now for our results. I'm going to orient you to look at specific areas of a correlation table now, so just follow along with me. As you can see, awe positively correlated with all three of the other positive epistemic emotions. The positive correlations between surprise, curiosity, and enjoyment also mirror the correlations found by Peckran and colleagues. Turning to the relations between epistemic emotions and learning outcomes, we get a very similar pattern of results for perceived task value and the learning strategies to what we see in Peckran and colleagues. Specifically, where surprise significantly correlated with the use of all learning strategies but not perceived task value in Peckran and colleagues. Here we can see that surprise positively correlated with the use of all learning strategies as well as perceived task value. And in line with Peckran and colleagues, both curiosity and enjoyment positively correlated with perceived task value and all four learning strategies. Of note, awe mirrors the pattern of results for surprise, curiosity, and enjoyment. Here, awe positively correlated with perceived task value and all four of the learning strategies. And this highlights that awe is well situated among the positive epistemic emotions. Now I'll orient you to course performance. From what you can see here, it is clear that none of the positive epistemic emotions in this study significantly correlated with course performance. And this is in contrast to research by Lauderer and colleagues, where enjoyment positively correlated with course performance. Moving to patterns that emerged for awareness of knowledge gaps and science interest. In line with McFetters, all positively correlated with both awareness of knowledge gaps and science interest. And notably, McFetters only examined awe. Here we examined the suite of epistemic emotions. So this study offers a novel examination of the interrelationships between the traditional set of positive epistemic emotions and awareness of knowledge gaps and science interest. So mirroring awe, curiosity and enjoyment positively correlated with an awareness of knowledge gaps and science interest. Surprise also positively correlated with an awareness of knowledge gaps. Fortunately, our study allowed for a replication attempt of McFedder's indirect effect, where awe predicts science interest via an awareness of knowledge gaps. In our study, awe was entered as the independent variable, awareness of knowledge gaps as the mediator, and science interest as the dependent variable. And what we find is that mirroring McFedder's indirect effect, the indirect effect of awe on science interest via awareness of knowledge gaps was significant. So what this means is that to the extent that students' awe experiences promoted awareness of knowledge gaps in the discipline, interest in the discipline increased. Given that we also had correlations between curiosity and enjoyment with awareness of knowledge gaps and science interest, and surprise and awareness of knowledge gaps, we decided to run similar indirect effect analyses for surprise, curiosity, and enjoyment. Not surprisingly, model results were very similar to those for awe, with indirect effects on science interest via an awareness of knowledge gaps as significant for all other positive epistemic emotions. And these results place surprise, curiosity, and enjoyment alongside awe as key emotions for generating an interest in science educational settings. So what does this all mean? Ultimately, this study builds on our current understanding of epistemic emotions and calls for the diversification of the traditional suite of epistemic emotions to include awe. In summary, awe correlated positively with other positive epistemic emotions, perceived task value, and all 4 learning strategies. The takeaway is that this suggests that, like other positive epistemic emotions, students who experience awe during their science course also value the learning activities more and utilize useful learning strategies more than their peers who experience less awe. Generally, we agree with McFedder's reasoning that awe is an epistemic emotion that is particularly relevant in science learning as it makes one's awareness of their knowledge gaps salient, and this leads the individual to adjust their schemas to accommodate the awe-inspiring stimuli, and they do this through expressing an interest in science learning. In terms of course performance, our study consistently reports null relationships between all epistemic emotions and course performance. And this diverges from Lauderer and colleagues' findings that enjoyment positively correlates with course performance, and it also diverges from Collado and colleagues' finding that awe increases cognitive performance. And this deviation may be due to a number of factors, some of which are differences in the way awe arises across studies. In this study, we examined naturally arising awe, however, past research examined experimentally induced awe. And the fact that course performance may not be the best indicator of learning outcomes. In any case, the evidence we have here does carry practical implications for educational settings. This study highlights that similarly to surprise and enjoyment, awe serves as a good candidate for motivating students to engage in useful learning strategies. And we suggest that educators endeavour to bolster positive epistemic emotions, including awe, in the delivery of their learning materials to enhance learning strategies among their students. And one way to achieve this is suggested by recent research. The authors find that when students pay attention to the current science exhibition, a greater sense of awe is induced compared to when students are distracted by looking ahead at adjacent exhibitions. In a similar vein, science presentations or lectures could keep the audience in the moment by not giving preemptive information about what's coming up next in the slides. Now, while this study has its strengths, it doesn't come without its pitfalls. So our sample is limited to university students, and therefore we cannot generalize these findings to learning at other stages. Also, since our sample is only psychology undergraduates, we cannot generalize to other sciences or non-science disciplines. And in addition, our study utilized recalled awe, so our findings could be constrained by recall bias. Despite these limitations, the broad takeaway from this study is the consistent evidence for the suitability of awe as an epistemic emotion, particularly in science contexts. And we suggest that educators harness the natural tendency for science topics to induce awe to promote learning outcomes for their students. And we encourage future researchers in this field to include awe in the suite of considered emotions to provide a more complete picture of learners' experiences. So that's all from me. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.